We would be pleased to answer any questions if you have them.
Will you respond to the Supreme Court ruling today and how this affects Judge Saul's opinion?
Obviously, I think you've all heard that Judge Sauls has postponed the delivery of his opinion pending his review of the Supreme Court decision. What we hope is that after reviewing it, he will then issue his opinion. I think the Supreme Court of the United States opinion does not in any way affect the contest that is going on in front of Judge Sauls, and we would hope that that decision would be issued promptly.
To follow up, yeah, but you relied heavily on the Supreme Court's decision in your closing argument. So do you think that would cause him pause now to ask for new evidence or a new argument?
Remember, the thing that we relied on heavily in the contest section was the statutory interpretation portion of the Florida Supreme Court decision. And that is exactly the portion that the United States Supreme Court says raises no problem at all. The only issue that's raised for clarification in the United States Supreme Court decision is to what extent was the Florida Supreme Court, in reaching its certification deadline decision, relying on Florida statutes and Florida statutory interpretation, and to what extent was it relying on an interpretation of the Florida Constitution. Now, as you know, in my closing argument yesterday, what I was talking about was entirely the statutory interpretation because that was what was relevant to the contest proceeding. That part of the opinion is not in any way affected by what the United States Supreme Court did.
David, do you believe that it changes the vote total from 537 votes back to 930 votes?
It doesn't now. There are a variety of steps by which you can conceive that happening. For example, if the Florida Supreme Court were to rule that its decision was necessarily based on a constitutional interpretation, and if that went back to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court were then to rule that the Florida Supreme Court could not do that, none of those holdings have been made yet, then you would have to go back and start with the 930 as opposed to the 537. Now, of course, all that means is that Broward County is in the same position as Palm Beach and Dade, because Palm Beach and Dade were not included in the certification anyway.
So what's your hope? What do you want the Florida Supreme Court to do now?
Well, it's always been the case, everybody's always known that this case was going to end up in the Florida Supreme Court from Judge Saul's decision. At that time, the Florida Supreme Court now may have to deal with a clarification of its original decision. So it may be one more issue for the Florida Supreme Court to deal with. What we want is what we've wanted from the beginning, which is an expeditious resolution of this issue.
But isn't that the problem you have now? You keep talking about having an expeditious resolution, and now we have one more issue that is at the very least going to